WP Speed Fix. In this video, we're talking about how to speed up WordPress admin backend. So this is a question we get asked about a lot. We have a blog post on our site about it, and I'm going to walk you through it. Now, this is a bit different to WooCommerce. So if you have a WooCommerce site, we actually have a post specifically for WooCommerce because it's a bit different. And you can check that out on the site here. There's a link here, but how to speed up slow WooCommerce backend, and there is a video on YouTube as well if you want to check that out. There's a few additional things that are WooCommerce specific that make it a bit different to a normal WordPress site. So if you do have WooCommerce, start there as opposed to this post. So let's get into it. So you see on the post, we've broken it down to why is the WordPress admin so slow and given the specific reasons, because a lot of people do speed optimization and they just randomly change things or add things, remove things, turn things on and off without actually diagnosing what the problem is. So there's some specific reasons why the WordPress admin backend is slow. And quite often when we do speed optimization work, there is one or two specific things that are a problem, or one or two things that are actually broken or not right. And then the rest of the things are just optimizations on top of that to make it faster. So when people come to us with a slow backend, slow admin panel, typically we're talking about pages that take 5 to 10 seconds to load. We're not talking about, they take 2 seconds to load and they want them as fast as possible. There's a difference between slow and needing optimization. So getting to this post will get you to something reasonable and will give you some optimizations on top of that. They're kind of two separate things. So let's get into it. So the first one is kind of obvious, but we have to say this again and again, is to use good hosting or avoid using bad hosting. So if you have cheap hosting, the backend is going to be slow. There's no real way around that. And by cheap hosting, we're talking about the cost of a cup of coffee versus the cost of a nice lunch. If your hosting is $2 or $5 a month, it's probably not going to be good enough. To expect performance out of that is probably unrealistic, as opposed to paying $20, $30, $50 a month for hosting. So just keep that in mind. There's some specific things that good hosting does that bad hosting doesn't, and one of those key things is support for the HTTP2 protocol. So I've got that here on our list. This is a big one. So often when we see people come to us with a really slow website, they're on hosting that they've been on for a very long time, or it's very cheap and it doesn't support this protocol. So this protocol has been around since 2015, and basically it speeds up how quickly the browser can connect to the website and download stuff. So with this protocol in place, the site will be 30, 50, even 100% faster, so twice as fast. So if your hosting doesn't support this protocol, the site is just going to be slow. A good yardstick, basically, like I said, is, if the hosting is $2 to $5 a month, even $10 a month, it's probably too cheap to be high performance. So just keep that in mind. If you want to do a few things to look at the hosting. So the first one is we have this post with fastest WordPress hosting. These are the hosts we typically recommend on an ongoing basis. So check that out on the site. It's under here, DIY guides, fastest WordPress hosts. Cloudways, Seaways.net. I'll just type that here. We'll put it in the show notes in the description of the video. Seaways.net. That's probably the host we recommend in terms of value versus performance. It is a bit technical, but that's worth checking out. Also, run your site through our speed test tool. So if you go here, on our site, go to more free stuff, free site speed test. So if you run your site through this test here, it's free, takes about 90 seconds. There's no opt-in required. You'll get a result that looks like this. So this is a test. I just picked it up, and you'll see it'll actually detect whether your host supports the HTTP2 protocol. So that's probably a good way to just check as well. And we do have some hosts that are on our naughty list, and it will tell you if it detects that it's not 100% accurate, but it will detect these hosts usually that we know that are slow or problematic. So those are hosts like Bluehost, HostGator, Crazy Domains. Those are very commonly cheap and slow hosts. So I think that goes without saying, but slow hosting is definitely a problem there. Okay, the next one. This is probably, for most sites, apart from slow bad hosting, this is probably the next most common root cause of slow backend. So either PHP errors or some sort of error happening under the bonnet. It doesn't necessarily need to be PHP error, but I'd say configuration error. Let's say site configuration error. Or PHP version errors. So the site either has a too low version of PHP or too high version of PHP, and there's plugins that are having errors, or code that has errors or is throwing errors as a result. So often these errors are happening under the bonnet. You don't see it, but on every single page load on the back end, the hosting is having to deal with these errors. So anytime you have an error or something like a 4, even a 404 error, it'll produce unpredictable results. So the hosting or the browser or whatever it is has to figure out what to do with that error. And sometimes it just waits to time out. Sometimes things are crashing in the back end, but basically errors cause freezing and cause unpredictable behavior. And you feel that the symptom is slowness, but various things could be happening under the bonnet. The easiest way to diagnose this or to kind of surface these errors is to use this plugin here, Query Monitor. It's free. Here it is here. Basically, when you install it, it adds this kind of toolbar menu item into WordPress in the back end. And you'll see here, it will surface errors as red and then warnings as brown. So you'll see red and brown. Red is actually really bad. It means there's something specific that's problematic. Brown is a warning, maybe needs to be fixed. But that will surface PHP errors or issues with plugins or configuration, and then you can kind of go down that rabbit hole and work with a developer or whatever to sort that out. So the most common issue we see is when we see this is there are paid plugins on the site or really old plugins that have been orphaned or they've just been abandoned and they no longer support the version of WordPress or no longer support the current version of PHP. So usually, if that's the case, in Query Monitor, it'll give you the error and it'll give you the plugin that's attached to. So a simple way to fix that is to upgrade the plugin. We see this issue, especially with paid plugins that sit outside the WordPress update ecosystem. They may need to be manually updated. So you need to go to the website, download it, and then install it. But using this plugin, you'll uncover those errors. So maybe the PHP version is too high and you need to drop it back, or it's too low and you need to bring it up, or there's plugins that need to be installed, or there's some sort of configuration error. If there's errors inside the WordPress configuration file, the WP config file, it'll also throw that up. So one common error we see is code in there, configuration code that's been duplicated, or if you've moved your site around from different hosts, there might be old code in there for a different hosting provider. It's custom for that hosting provider that no longer works on your existing host and it's throwing some sort of error. So basically install the plugin and then troubleshoot the errors that it's surfacing or the warnings that it's surfacing. I think that's all pretty straightforward. We won't go any more into detail there. No caching in place. So WordPress basically needs page caching to go fast. So what caching does essentially, it pre-builds the pages on the front of the site. So when the user comes to the site, the pages are ready to go. They're already built. All the PHP processing's done. All the database lookups are done. There's basically two plugins we recommend, WP Rocket, so wprocketplugin.com, or Flying Press plugin, flyingpress.net. Flying Press is a bit more technical to configure. WP Rocket's a bit more DIY friendly. So either of those will get page caching in place. They both do a lot of similar optimization. Flying Press is a bit more technical though. But without page caching in place, the site is just going to be slow. So every load on the front end is chewing a lot of server resources, so it will just make everything slower. So you need page caching in place. Some hosts have page caching built in. It's worth checking that before you go buying plugins. The caching may also be disabled, so that could be something else. You have caching, but it's been turned off and it's making everything slow. So that's pretty straightforward. The next one, number 5, no content delivery network in place. So what a content delivery network is a network of servers around the world that serve up some part of the site or all of the site. So we recommend Cloudflare. So Cloudflare is pretty much the biggest CDN in the world, and there is a service they offer called, even the free Cloudflare plan will help you, but we recommend you use the $5 a month APO service. You'll see here's the Cloudflare website, and I think if we go to pricing, we should be able to find that. Oh, here we go. Compare all plans. It's not listed, the $5 service. There we go, APO. So basically, the free version is great, but the APO service will add caching. It's going really slow. It'll add caching. So basically, Cloudflare caches the entire page at all the Cloudflare nodes around the world. So what that will do, that'll absorb a lot of load. So Cloudflare is taking up, I'm not logged in. So Cloudflare is taking up a lot of the load. So there's less load on the hosting. So basically, that frees up the hosting to only do stuff that the hosting can do, so that's stuff in the back end in this instance. There's also some things we'll talk about in a minute with Cloudflare. Cloudflare is also firewalls, so we can add firewall rules into Cloudflare to remove a lot of the garbage traffic, scrapers and crawlers that are hitting the site. So we'll talk about that in a second. But long story short, use a content delivery network. Ideally use Cloudflare. It's the biggest. It also has a free plan. And it has a whole bunch of other features there, like firewall. On the higher paid plans, the $20 a month plan, it also adds things like image optimization and adds a beefier firewall. So if you have a highly monetized site, that would be worth doing as well. But long story short, use the CDN. Don't use two CDNs. One common problem we see is people stacking optimizations on top of each other and using two optimizations. So if you use two content delivery networks, that'll actually make things slower and worse. So just keep that in mind as well. So that's CDNs, content delivery network. Object caching. So this is probably only applicable if you have a bigger site or if you have a lot of users. We have some clients, they have sites where they have multiple staff in there editing pages or products or posts on an ongoing basis all day long. So if you have a bigger site like that, you ideally want to have object caching. So the lack of object caching won't specifically make the site slow, but this is more of an optimization. So if you have multiple stuff in there or a bigger site, object caching will help. Basically, it's a type of database caching. So the hosting needs to support it. So you need to have support for something called Redis or Memcache. That's the piece of software that runs on the server, and then you need an object caching plugin. So if you're using a host like Cloudways, like we talked about before, or SiteGround is one of the other hosts we recommend, they do have object caching built in. So it may be the case where that needs to be turned on. You might already have it, but that will help bigger or busier sites. So that's worth checking out, and especially if you have multiple staff in there at the same time making edits and changes. All right, let's get into this. So we talked about this with the Cloudflare stuff. So malicious traffic, brute force attacks, aggressive web crawlers. So they may be legitimate. You'll see here, I've got 2 points here. They may be legitimate crawlers like Google crawler, crawling things like query strings, or they may be aggressive SEO crawlers like SEMrush or Ahrefs. So let's talk about these in together. Basically, it's bad traffic. So it's traffic that's not legitimate, they're not real users, and basically they're hammering the site, so chewing up a lot of resources. So brute force attacks are probably the most common one here. So WordPress sites typically get 1,000 to 10,000 brute force attacks a day, which is a lot. So each one of those chews a lot of server resources. And things like malicious traffic and brute force attacks, they don't happen spread out throughout the day. They'll happen in small clusters of time. So you might have multiple attempts per second to log into the backend, brute force the backend. So there's a few different ways we deal with this. So like we talked about, we use Cloudflare, and we have this post Cloudflare rules for WordPress. So you see here, if you click on that and go to our site, there's one here. If I scroll down, block brute force attacks. So we have a simple way to block brute force attacks. Basically, you add this firewall rule to Cloudflare. The free version of Cloudflare will do it, and it will filter out brute force attacks on the WordPress backend, and that significantly reduces the load on the site. This is going to be a very common problem if you have a bigger site that's ranking well, or if you're in a highly competitive industry as well. So that's an easy way to block brute force attacks, and that moves the load from that across to Cloudflare. So you'll see here, my next point is use the free version of Wordfence. This will also block brute force attacks, but it does that at the hosting layer. So that actually choose resources, whereas if you do it at Cloudflare, that choose Cloudflare's resources, not your hosting resources. So we're kind of using multiple layers of protection here, and Cloudflare is a good place to start with that because it's free and it doesn't affect the hosting. You'll see on this post, we also have a couple of other rules. We typically, if you don't have a WooCommerce site, you don't need this XML RPC file exposed. So this is a WordPress API, so we can block that in Cloudflare. That again is something that quite often gets attacked. Blocking SEO bots and crawlers. So we do this as well. So these are the most common crawlers we see: SEMrush, Ahrefs, Open Site Explorer, and Dotbot, and they're very aggressive. So you can just block those outright in there with this firewall rule. And that also has a secondary benefit in that the data about your site won't be as rich in those tools, so competitors can't see as much about your site in those tools as they would if those crawlers were allowed to access the site. So blocking those SEO crawlers, quite often those bots can be very aggressive and can knock the site offline even. I think there's one more we had. Filtering traffic outside your target country. So this can be useful. our company is based in Australia, so we have a lot of Australian customers. And this is one common thing we do for customers that are targeting only Australia. We also have a lot of US customers as well, but blocking, or not blocking, we don't like blocking outright, but filtering traffic outside the target country. So with this firewall rule, what this will do is basically run the traffic through a reCAPTCHA type page. You would have seen this around the web. You go to a website and it says checking your security. What that is, that's basically running you through a reCAPTCHA type thing to check to see if you're a legitimate browser or a bot. So that will basically filter kind of bot traffic or automated traffic outside of your country. That will block some legitimate traffic too. So if you've got APIs or third-party tools accessing the site, it most likely will block those as well. So you'll need to add exceptions there. You'll see in this rule here, we actually have an exception for uptime monitoring tools, but there may be other tools like backup plugins you're using that rule might need to be tweaked. And then legitimate crawlers can often, particularly recently, we've seen this in the last 6 months, since about mid-2024, particularly with Google, since AI search became more of a thing. Google is more aggressively crawling websites, and we see query strings being crawled a lot. So query strings are the bit on the end of the URL. They're not full pages, and in WooCommerce in particular, we see this issue where a crawler will come along and crawl add to cart and add to wish list query strings, which adds things and removes things to the cart very rapidly in a short period of time. So we don't want Google doing that. That wastes Google crawl budget, but it also wastes a lot of server resources. So you can get this list from Google Search Console of these query strings, and you can block them in the robots.txt file. So here's our website, WP Speedfix, and you can see we've blocked these different URL extensions because Google was crawling them. So this one here is it's a very common one. So Google will crawl the search on a site. We don't want it crawling the search pages, so we block that. We don't want Google crawling the login page as well, so we block that. If you pause for a second, I'll bring up, here it is here, Google Search Console. If you want to grab or find the query strings you should be blocking, if you go Google Search Console for the site, you'll see in here, usually it's under this section, alternate page with proper canonical tag, and it will list out the query strings. So you see, here's a couple here. So some affiliate strings that Google is trying to crawl here. So if these aren't legitimate pages, these really aren't a big deal for us because there's only a handful of them. But if they are not legitimate pages, you might want to block those query strings. And you'll see once you've blocked them, they'll appear here and blocked in robots.txt. So you can see here, there's the query strings we're blocking. You saw that we're blocking the WP login page, for example. So you really want the query strings that are appearing a lot. And you can see here the WP login is appearing a lot for us. So that's why we blocked it. We don't want Google trying to crawl the login page like that, as that's not ideal, burning crawl budget, etc. So that's that. That one is a bit technical. So be careful if you add something, even if you have a typo in that robots.txt file, it could break your SEO. So be very mindful messing with this stuff. If you're not comfortable, you probably need a developer to help you there. We do also have a Google Search Console audit service at WP Speedfix that will give you the exact recommendations or the exact items in this case that you need to add to the robots.txt file. So basically we want to block anything that's not legitimate pages from legitimate crawlers. I think that makes sense. Anyway, so that's that. So the whole point of that section is to reduce load on the site. So stop things being loaded or stop the resource drain on pages that aren't legitimate or they're not legitimate users. All right, let's talk about the next one. Large database tables, and also running MyISAM storage engine. A large database doesn't by itself make WordPress slow. Or you may get some scenarios where a plugin has been logging things it shouldn't, or isn't clearing out its log, or has a lot of transients, and that's making the database very big. So that's most likely what the issue would be there if there's a large database table. Probably more common is you're running this older storage engine, MyISAM. And I'll just bring up this post here just to show, kind of illustrate this one. So the WordPress database can run in two different formats. Here we go. So this post talks about WordPress database specifically. So speed up WordPress database queries. I've linked to that. So there's a whole bunch of other stuff about database stuff there. but this is the most common one we see. So there's two different storage formats, MyISAM and InnoDB. So MyISAM's old, InnoDB is newer. It's not new, but it's newer. Basically, the difference between the two is it's akin to maybe an Excel spreadsheet that you would email around to people to edit versus a Google Sheet where multiple people can edit it at once. So with the MyISAM table, the main bottleneck there is that when the database is writing to a database table, so think of a database table as a spreadsheet, only one write can happen at a time. So that database table is locked. So the writes have to be done in a series. So they queue up waiting for the database table to be available. With InnoDB, only the row in that table is locked while that database write is happening. So the writes happen much faster. So this is particularly important if you're in the back end of the website editing things and you update a post. The writes will happen much faster with this InnoDB storage engine, and especially so if you have multiple staff in there editing things at once. So we want to be running on this newer format. So if you have an older WordPress site that's been around for a few years, you're going to be running this older format, or maybe you have some tables running this older format. So we recommend this plugin here, ServeBolt Optimizer. You basically install it, run its optimization, it will convert the database tables, and then you can get rid of the plugin. So before you do this, make a backup. So don't go and do this without backing up your database. There's not very much risk here, but there's always risk when you change these things. So that's my disclaimer. Make sure you have a backup first. So go and make this change. So this tool will convert the database tables to that newer format. It'll also add some indexes to the database tables, a couple of the database tables to speed them up. So it's really easy to do. The optimization might take a minute. So, round trip might take you 10 minutes to install this plugin. We'll do a backup, install this plugin, and then get rid of it after you run the optimization. So that's that. You can also use this plugin here. This plugin will also do it. This plugin used to be a database-only plugin. Now it does a whole bunch of other stuff. So just don't turn anything else on in there. Like we talked about before, two of any optimization is bad. But this will also give you kind of detailed insights into database sizes. It'll also help. It can also convert to that newer storage engine as well. But it'll highlight any tables that are big or fat. So this one we typically use to look at database table size. So usually it will tell you inside this plugin. I don't know if there's any screenshots here. Probably. Yeah, there we go. So here we go. So this will show you, I wonder if we can load that up. There we go. Database table size. So, if you have a database table that is, huge in comparison to the other tables, then that may be something to look at. And you see here, this one, often tables related to logs will often be named logs. So it's very easy to see if you have an issue. And the most common issue is a log file gone astray, where it's logging all the visits to the site or all the actions or something. Clearing out the log will reduce the size. So that's the most common issue we see. But probably from a performance perspective, doing that conversion to the InnoDB is the big one. Deleting transients. So transients are temporary information about visitors who visit the site, and after a while they expire. So you want to delete, I'll just make that clear, that's expired transients. You want to delete expired transients. So WP Optimize can do this. WP Rocket plugin can also do this on a scheduled basis. So we don't see it so often anymore, but often in the past we have seen sites with 2 million transients stored. So that's 2 million lines in a database, which is going to make database lookup slow. And that really is where we see large database tables or tables slowing down database lookups. So deleting expired transients will also help speed things up in the back end. But if you have a fairly modern site that's up to date, you probably don't have that issue. Okay, let's leave database stuff alone. So that's that. If you want to see more on database stuff, we have a whole post about it. So go check that out. Over optimization. So like I said before, 2 optimizations where you should only have 1. So this is 2. The most common problem here is 2 content delivery networks. The reason why that's slow is because you have to loop the traffic from one network to another and then to the hosting. So you're adding an extra hop in there, or an extra step in the process there. So you only want 1 CDN. Often we'll see people use Cloudflare and then use the CDN inside the WP Rocket plugin. That is a mistake. Don't do that. So 1 CDN only, 1 caching plugin only. Don't duplicate optimizations. You can certainly use 2 plugins, 2 optimization plugins. Very often we'll use a combination of WP Rocket, Auto Optimize, and Perf Matters, or WP Rocket and Perf Matters. You just want to avoid having the same optimization turn on 2 different plugins. And we use those plugins for different reasons because they have different features. So just keep that in mind. But avoid duplicating optimizations. Long story short. 404 errors. So this is a very common problem, especially if the 404 error on the front of the site is happening across all pages. So that's where something, the template, say the footer or header, is 404ing out. So a few different ways to check this. Use our site speed audit tool like I showed you before, Site Speed Bot. So go to our website, go to free site speed test there. It'll surface 404 errors. And I think that example we had actually had a 404. Yeah, there we go. You've got at least one file that's 404ing out. And you can scroll down here and it will tell you, it'll have red next to it. There you go, that one there. So in this case, this is a site under development because here header file is 404ing out. So it'll give you the file that is 404ing out. The other way to do it is do a full SEO audit of your site. Use an SEO audit tool. So either one of those, but basically 404s are slow. When the browser hits the 404, the hosting has to process it and do something with it. So anytime you have a 404 error, it's bad for speed. It's bad for users because the site will be broken in some way, and it's bad for SEO. So 404s are actually really bad for speed and SEO and overall not good. So you want to fix any 404s you have. That's enough about that. Cron issues. So let's talk about this. So Cron, WordPress has a cron job. So a cron job is a scheduled job that does things in the background. So that may be things like cleaning up databases. It might be just maintenance items, things like that. But basically it's scheduled work that happens in the backend. By default, WordPress runs the cron on every page load. So that on a big site with a lot of plugins, the cron job can actually be very slow, and it can cause some of the page loads in the backend to be very slow, especially if the cron jobs are slow or taking a long time. The solution for this, and I'm not going to put a lot of detail here because it depends on the host you're on, is to use a server-based cron. So instead of that scheduled job running every time the page loads, it will run at specific intervals set by the server. So basically you want to run, I'm just running a manual server cron jobs. Yeah. So you want that. So the best way to do this or set this up is to search for your host, how to manually set the cron job in Cloudways, for example, and it will give you the instructions to do that. It's a bit technical. You might need support to help you. But basically you want to have a server-based cron versus a WordPress-based cron. So that'll make things in the back end faster, especially if you have a big site and especially if you have a WooCommerce site as well, because cron jobs tend to run long there. So the cron job can take anywhere from 2 seconds to 30 seconds. So if you are not using a server-based cron job, if the cron job takes 30 seconds, that means occasionally some of your backend loads will take 30 seconds. So that's that issue there. But that one is a bit more developer-y, not so DIY. This one here is specific to uploading images and media. So if the images are very slow to upload or laggy, it may be because of your image compression plugin might be slow. So if you have an image compression plugin, typically it will compress the images every time you upload them. So it has to dial out to compress those images. So that could be the issue there if there's anything to do with uploading images or media as slow. And turning off, there are features where you can schedule optimizations and not have them run, and most plugins have this feature anyway, not have the optimization run when the images are uploaded. So you want to disable that feature, or just disable your image optimization plugin temporarily and see if the images are faster to upload. So that's a specific issue around image uploads. So if your image uploads are slow, that could be your issue there. I've added a couple of more bits here. So minor optimizations, enabling HSTS. This will help the speed a little bit, particularly for repeat visitors. So we have a post about that. So HSTS basically is a server header that tells the browser to only ever load the site over a secure channel. It will reduce the time to first byte. So it will reduce the speed a little bit. It's a minor optimization though. It won't take you from 10-second loads to 1 second load. It might, in some scenarios, take half a second, maybe 1 second off the loading time of backend pages. So it's a minor optimization. It may do nothing. So just keep that in mind. And also using a host or enabling the HTTP3 protocol. So we talked before at the top about the HTTP2 protocol. There's also a HTTP3 protocol that is a little bit faster than HTTP2. It's not like going from version 1.1 to version 2 where you're getting 50 to 100% speed gains. You might get a 10% speed gain, maybe a 20% speed gain. You can enable this if you're using Cloudflare. It can be enabled there. Usually it's enabled by default. but also not all hosting supports it. So asking your host whether they support this protocol may also be a way, will also help the speed and be something to look at. But that is another optimization similar to HSTS. It may do nothing. It may give you, up to half a second speed gain. So those are minor optimizations. Again, they're not going to take you from 10 seconds to 1 second. There's also a lot of posts around the web written by content writers who have no technical experience telling you to do things to speed up the back end. Again, that comes back to just stabbing in the dark, randomly making changes without actually diagnosing the root cause of the problem. So these things will make zero difference to the backend speed, or you just shouldn't do them. So anything to do with minifying files or combining them does nothing for backend speed. So that's a waste of time. If anything, it'll actually make the backend slower. So you want to avoid anything to do with minification or combining files. Minifying is a very old optimization. It does nothing on the modern web. With server compression, we've got gzip, we've got Brotli, we have caching. Minification does nothing or actually makes the speed worse. So just avoid it. Just don't do it. Anything relating to the WordPress heartbeat. So this is just another nonsense optimization that you'll see around the web. The heartbeat is not making your backend slow. Messing with the heartbeat, WordPress heartbeat. So WordPress heartbeat is basically the browser is talking back to the website. So if you've got a post open, for example, and you're making edits, the post might be background saving at 60-second intervals or something like that. Messing with the WordPress heartbeat can break things. So you can actually break functionality in the backend and cause errors upstream. So don't do that. There are settings inside the WP Rocket plugin that you should avoid. Don't mess with it. It's not going to do anything. Increasing the WordPress memory limit, this won't do anything either. If you are hitting the WordPress memory limit, your pages are going to crash. So if you have enough memory, the page will load fine. More memory does not make the pages load faster. They will just crash if they don't have enough. You'll get an error saying out of memory. So this won't do anything, so it's not going to make any difference. Removing dashboard widgets. So this will only speed up the dashboard page. It may speed up the login a little bit, but overall, it's not really going to speed up the whole backend experience. If you're doing a lot of logins to the site, it might, and if you've got a really slow widget, it might, but it's not really going to fix the real problem you have. It's a simple optimization to do enough, but it's not going to fix if you've got problems with editing pages and that sort of thing. Caching the WordPress backend, I've seen this around the web. You do not want to do this. We always talk about reliability over speed, and some of these optimizations break things. So that's why I said anything related to the WordPress heartbeat is bad, especially caching the WordPress backend is bad because you'll have out-of-date data in there. You'll have stale data. You may overwrite things in the database that will cause corruption. So we always want to choose reliability first or stability first over speed. We don't want speed optimizations that are going to introduce risk, introduce the chance of data loss, or anything that's going to break the site. So don't cache the WordPress backend or anything like that. There's probably one other thing worth doing in just general reliability is getting uptime monitoring on your site. So uptime monitoring will surface issues with performance or host configuration, or basically the site going offline or having issues. So there's lots of different uptime tools out there. If we have built one of our own, Simple Uptime, so you go simpleuptime.co. It's cheap, it's easy, it's simple. We built this for this specific problem that we have clients who they were on unreliable hosting. So uptime monitoring will surface those issues again. So again, like I said, you want reliability over speed, and a host that's down is zero speed essentially. So uptime monitoring, if your site is monetized, is a must. So check that out, simpleuptime.co. That's pretty much it for this post. If you want more help, there's a few different ways we can help you. If you go to our site, wpspeedfix.com, you can request a free audit there on the homepage. We can tell you what we can do, how we can help. There's also a bunch of free tools here: free SEO audit tool, free core web vitals report, free site speed test, free website valuation tool. Those are all, the first three are no opt-in required. They take 60 to 90 seconds. There's plenty of stuff in there. It'll give you plenty of advice for free if you want to DIY it, particularly the SEO audit tool and the site speed test tool. They'll uncover issues that potentially hurting the speed in the back end, or this one's powered by AI, so there's a lot of, you'll see here, there's a lot of errors that it surfaces, and it'll tell you about the general site speed overall. So that's it for this video. If you have any questions, post in the comments below and we'll happily come back to you. Cheers.